Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're slipping quietly into the forgotten edges of history. The places where rumors were born, where fear shaped truth, and where conspiracies, once whispered in the dark, turned out to be real. From medieval assassins hiding in candlelit corridors, to poisoners behind palace walls, to mind control experiments that governments once denied, tonight's stories remind us that the shadows of the past were never empty. They were watching, they were waiting, and sometimes they were true. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, let your breath soften, and allow the night to open like an old book, one mysterious page at a time. Imagine opening your eyes into the cold breath of medieval France. The year is 1307, and the world is tighter, narrower, hungrier than the stories we grew up with. This was not an age of fairy tale knights rescuing princesses beneath shining banners. This was the age of secrets, an age where power hid in shadows, and where the strongest force in Europe was not a king nor a pope, but a brotherhood wearing white cloaks marked by a crimson cross, the Knights Templar. They began as humble warrior monks, sworn to protect pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem. But centuries have a way of twisting purpose into empire. As the Crusades raged and kingdoms rose and crumbled, the Templars built something no one had ever seen, a financial machine woven across continents. They became the bankers of Europe, trusted by kings, feared by armies, and whispered about by common men who only saw the gleam of their treasure caravans rolling through the night. Imagine it for a moment. Their fortresses standing like stone giants along the coastlines, their vaults filled with gold, jewels, and documents sealed in wax. They invented credit notes before the word banking even existed. A pilgrim could deposit money in Paris and retrieve it in Jerusalem. A king could borrow a fortune with a single signature. And one particular king did, again and again. His name was Philip IV of France, remembered as Philip the Fair, though his fairness did not extend to mercy or honor. He was handsome, ambitious, and drowning in debt. Every campaign he launched, every palace he gilded, every display of royal splendor, all financed by the Templars. And like any debtor, the moment came when Philip realized a truth older than history. A man who owes is never free. So he watched them. He watched the way crowds parted for the Templar commanders, the way nobles lowered their voices when a white mantle appeared, the way gold seemed to obey their command more readily than it obeyed his. The King of France could not tolerate rivals, and worse, he could not tolerate creditors. From the narrow windows of his palace, Philip saw not holy warriors, but an empire within his kingdom. Untouchable, wealthy beyond imagination, loyal not to him, but to God and their own Grand Master. And slowly a dark idea began to bloom. Why repay what you could erase?
Why fear those you could destroy? The Templars were soldiers, yes, but they were also bound by discipline, by rituals, by adherence to a code. They did not expect treachery. They did not expect the crown itself to turn its blade upon them. And Philip, with the cold precision of a man cornered by his own greed, realized that the greatest heist in history would not involve breaking into a vault, but erasing the men who built it. He would strike not with armies, but with letters. Not with swords, but with accusations. Not at noon under the sun, but at dawn, when even the bravest warrior is half asleep, when the mind is soft and the world is still fragile. The conspiracy that would change the fate of Europe began with a single thought whispered in the darkness. What if the mightiest knights in Christendom could be erased in one night? And somewhere deep inside the palace walls, King Philip's hand tightened around the quill as a plan took form. A plan that would turn Friday the 13th into one of history's most cursed dates. The world did not know it yet, but the first domino had already fallen. Now, breathe slowly. Let the torches fade in your imagination. We step deeper into the night, toward the sealed letters that would unleash the storm.
Now let your mind drift deeper into the silence of medieval France, to a night when the world held its breath without knowing why. For in the autumn of 1307, King Philip IV set into motion a conspiracy crafted not with swords, but with parchment and wax, deadly tools in the hands of a desperate king. On the 14th of September, under the flickering glow of candles in his private chamber, Philip signed a series of letters that were never meant to be opened, at least not yet. Each letter was identical, sealed with the unmistakable imprint of the fleur-de-lis, wrapped in layers of secrecy, and accompanied by a single command written in cold, unwavering ink. Do not open until dawn on the 13th day of October. Imagine hundreds of couriers on horseback, cloaks billowing behind them, galloping across France under moonlit skies to deliver these forbidden envelopes to every sheriff, every magistrate, every commander who served the crown. They carried their orders with trembling hands, knowing that even a curious glance could cost them their lives. The letters were tucked away in locked chests, hidden behind altar stones, placed beneath floorboards, guarded night and day by men who did not dare to speculate. And yet, the silence itself was heavy enough to raise questions. What kind of royal decree was so dangerous that it could not be opened for an entire month? What kind of threat required absolute synchronization from Paris to the farthest edges of the kingdom? Meanwhile, the Knights Templar went about their days completely unaware. Their halls echoed with the clatter of armor, the chanting of prayers, the glow of torches reflected on polished shields. They trained, they rode, they handled the finances of rulers who trusted them more than they trusted their own treasurers. And every night, as they knelt in dim chapels lit by a single candle, they whispered vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, never imagining that treachery was walking slowly toward them on quiet feet. In the villages surrounding their fortresses, local folks sometimes spoke of the Templars with awe, sometimes with suspicion, but always with an awareness of their power. Yet none could imagine that a king would dare move against them. The order was holy. The order was feared. The order was necessary. But Philip was none of those things. He was a man cornered by debt, consumed by ambition, and driven by a need to break those who overshadowed him. And so the sealed letters waited, like coiled snakes sleeping under locked lids. Night after night, the kingdom held a quiet tension, the kind that settles over the land before a storm. Then came the final week. Men in royal service felt the weight of unseen destiny pressing on their shoulders. Some could barely sleep. Some prayed. Some whispered to each other about omens and strange dreams. And on the eve of October 12th, a colder wind swept through France, rattling shutters, dimming candles, and curling beneath doors like the breath of fate itself. Then dawn began to rise. Across the kingdom, from bustling towns to remote countryside, hundreds of officials gathered around locked chests, each holding the same sealed royal order. The sun had not yet risen fully when they cracked the wax and unfolded the parchment inside. And there, written in unyielding script, was the command that would shake the foundations of Europe. Arrest all Knights Templar, seize their property, leave none unbound. It was not a decree, it was an ambush, a silent declaration of war against men who had not even drawn their swords. And as the world shifted under the weight of those cruel words, the letters fluttered in trembling hands, like the wings of dark birds now released into the sky. The trap was set. Now, take a slow breath, because in the next moment we step into the dawn of Friday the 13th, when the silence collapses into chaos. Now breathe in slowly, because the sky above medieval France is beginning to pale with the first gray light of dawn. It is Friday, the 13th of October, 1307. A date that will echo through centuries, stitched into human superstition like a scar that never quite fades. Across the kingdom, the sealed orders have been opened, and suddenly, as the cold morning air creeps through narrow streets, France erupts, not with the roar of armies, but with the synchronized thud of fists pounding on Templar doors. Imagine the shock inside those stone fortresses. The Knights Templar, the most disciplined soldiers in Christendom, jolting awake to chaos they did not see coming. No horns of warning, no spies whispering an omen. Only the brutal arrival of royal guards wielding chains instead of swords. Torches flare as doors splinter under battering rams. The smell of damp hay,
Cold iron and frightened horses thickens the air. Warriors who once rode into battle against Saracen armies now find themselves dragged from bed with wrists bound behind their backs, hair still tousled from sleep. Some demand to see the king. Some shout that they serve God, not France. Some simply stare, unable to understand how the world flipped upside down in a single heartbeat. What makes this moment so haunting is its silence, the silence of power shifting. The Templars do not resist. They are too stunned, too disciplined, too certain of their innocence. They believe that justice will prevail, that the accusations, whatever they may be, are a mistake, a misunderstanding, a flicker of royal paranoia that will extinguish itself by noon. But dawn is merciless, and the king's orders are not a mistake. They are the first step of a heist disguised as holiness. Across France, hundreds of Templars are rounded up with ruthless precision. Old commanders, their beards silvered by time. Young initiates who barely earned their white mantles. Scholars, treasurers, cooks, stable boys. The crown does not discriminate. Every man tied to the temple is shackled. Their horses are seized, their vaults cracked open by men who had never dared to imagine holding a Templar key. And slowly, a dreadful truth spreads like frost across the land. The king's net is so wide that no one inside the order can escape. While prisoners shiver in their tunics, barefoot on stone floors, royal officers storm through Templar rooms, counting coins, confiscating weapons, taking inventory of treasures so immense they can scarcely comprehend it. Gold cups, relics, chests filled with silver coins marked with the cross, ledgers detailing loans made to kings, bishops, entire armies. Every piece of wealth stripped away under the guise of justice. And through it all, the Templars watch in stunned silence. Men who once protected pilgrims through scorching deserts now stand powerless before their own king. The humiliation is deliberate. Philip wants the world to see them fall, not in battle, but in chains. And so the morning unfolds like a cruel ritual. The fortress gates thrown open, the prisoners marched out in lines, their white cloaks stained with dust, their hands trembling not from fear, but from disbelief. They do not yet know the charges against them, but they feel deep in their bones that something irreversible has begun. The world they knew, its order, its faith, its certainties has cracked beneath them. And as sunlight finally breaks across the horizon, illuminating their bowed heads, Friday the 13th becomes more than a date. It becomes a wound in history. Now, let the sound of that cold morning soften in your imagination. We step next into the darkness beneath the earth, where confessions will be carved from flesh and bone. Descend with me into the underground chambers of medieval France, where light falters, where footsteps echo like distant memories,
and where the fate of the Knights Templar was carved not by justice, but by agony. After the arrests of Friday the 13th, the Templars were not executed immediately. Philip needed something more valuable than their lives. He needed their confessions. Confessions that would stain their honor, justify his theft, and turn Europe against them. And in the Middle Ages, confession was not something gently requested. It was something violently extracted. Imagine a stone chamber buried beneath a fortress, colder than the dawn outside. Torches flicker weakly, throwing thin stripes of orange across damp walls. In the center, a wooden rack waits, its ropes coiled like serpents ready to strike. One by one, the Templars were dragged in. Proud knights who once charged into battle with the sun glinting off their swords now grit their teeth as shackles clamp around their wrists and ankles. The torturers worked in silence. They did not curse, nor shout, nor threaten. They simply turned the wheel. Slowly, relentlessly. Joints crack. Spine bends, muscles tear, and the human voice, when pushed to its breaking point, trembles into the one sound kings crave most: surrender. The accusations were absurd: spitting on the cross, worshipping a demon head named Baphomet, performing forbidden rituals. But pain has a way of rewriting truth. Under torture, the bravest knight can confess to any sin a king desires. And so parchment after parchment filled with signatures, some real, some forged, confirming crimes no one had witnessed, crimes no one believed until fear forced them to. Meanwhile, King Philip watched the pile of confessions grow. Each document a nail in the coffin of an order he envied, feared, and intended to erase forever. But there was one man the king wanted most: Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Unlike the others, de Molay resisted for as long as his body allowed. He denied heresy, he denied the lies. He denied the fabricated horrors the torturers asked him to speak aloud. But resistance has its limits. After weeks of torment, his voice hoarse, his skin bruised, his spirit wavering between faith and despair, de Molay finally murmured a confession, not to heresy, but to weakness, and Philip seized that moment like a wolf finally tasting blood. Years passed, trials dragged on, and on the 18th of March, 1314, the king orchestrated a final spectacle. Jacques de Molay and several high-ranking Templars were led to a small island on the Seine, the cold shadow of Notre Dame looming above them. A wooden pyre was built. The ropes binding them were tightened. The crowd gathered, murmuring prayers and gossip. The flames were lit. Fire swallowed dry kindling, then climbed the wooden beams, then reached for the fabric of white cloaks stained with soot and time. And through the rising smoke, Jacques de Molay did something no one expected. He straightened his back, he lifted his head, and he spoke not with fear, but with fury. Pope Clement, King Philip, before this year ends, I summon you before the tribunal of God. His voice cut through the crackling fire like a blade. Witnesses stepped back in horror.
The curse flew into the air, carried by heat and desperation. History does not forget what happened next. Pope Clement died within a month. King Philip, young, strong, unassailable, died that same year during a hunting trip, his body collapsing in the forest without warning. Whether you believe in curses or coincidence, the world whispered the same thing. The Grand Master kept his promise. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, remember that no power stands forever. Kingdoms fall. Gold fades. Armies turn to dust. But truth, no matter how deeply buried, survives in the echoes of history. And now, let the embers fade.
Let your mind drift now, gently, toward France in the 17th century, where the world shimmered beneath candlelight and ambition. Outside, the night is cold, but inside the Palace of Versailles, the air is warm, perfumed, and thick with secrets. The fire in the great stone hearth crackles softly, its golden glow dancing up the marble walls like restless spirits searching for a place to rest. You are standing in the Hall of Mirrors, silent, empty, almost sacred in its stillness. Hundreds of candles float in the chandeliers overhead, their reflections multiplying endlessly across polished glass. The effect is hypnotic, a corridor of light stretching into forever, yet somehow suffocating in its perfection. In this place, grandeur was not merely decoration, it was a weapon. And at the center of it all stood Louis XIV, the Sun King, whose brilliance illuminated everything and cast shadows just as deep. Imagine the rustle of silk gowns gliding behind you, the faint clink of crystal glasses echoing from distant salons, the slow, measured footsteps of courtiers moving through marble corridors with calculated grace. Versailles was a theater where every gesture was deliberate, every smile a mask, every whisper a blade. Beneath the powder, beneath the satin, beneath the layers of forced politeness, there pulsed a quiet, hungry darkness. Because here, love was a battlefield, influence was a currency, and proximity to the king determined whether a family would rise or disappear into obscurity. And for those seeking escape from unwanted marriages, aging spouses, or rivals in the king's gaze, there were no legal options. Divorce was forbidden. Separation was scandalous. But murder, murder could be invisible if performed with sophistication. And in the glittering world of Versailles, sophistication was abundant. Picture a duchess with eyes cold as winter frost, trailing a cloud of rose and amber perfume as she glides through a gilded doorway, smiling sweetly at the husband she despises. Picture a handsome courtier bowing gracefully, though behind his pleasant smile hides desperation,
for one rival too many has captured the king's attention. They cannot request justice. They cannot confront their enemies. But there is something else they can do. Hidden far away from the shimmering mirrors and golden ceilings, in the dim alleyways of Paris, a different kind of kingdom thrived, one built not on marble and velvet, but on shadows and whispers. And in that darkness, a delicate glass vial was passed hand to hand, glowing faintly when it caught the light. The nobles called it poudre de succession, inheritance powder, a name so polite, so graceful, that it almost disguised the truth. It was poison, a solution for problems that could not be solved in daylight, a new beginning disguised as a tragedy, a silent exit concealed beneath lace handkerchiefs and trembling lips. And as the nobility clinked their glasses during lavish feasts, as violins wailed in golden salons, as dancers twirled beneath painted ceilings, no one suspected that death itself was being invited into Versailles, dressed elegantly, moving quietly, smiling through the perfume. Tonight, in this hushed moment, with the fire flickering gently beside you, listen closely. The echoes inside the Hall of Mirrors are not only reflections, they are memories of footsteps that once carried intentions far darker than their shadows revealed.
Now let us drift away from the polished mirrors and golden ceilings of Versailles, traveling down candle-lit corridors until the scent of rosewater fades, replaced slowly by the damp, earthy breath of Parisian alleyways. The fire beside you crackles, sparks rising like the tiny souls of long-forgotten secrets, as we enter a world where nobility shed their silk and jewels, hiding themselves beneath thick cloaks and veils. It is here, far from the elegance of the court, that we find a woman whose influence reached deeper into the veins of France than even the Sun King himself, Catherine Monvoisin. History calls her La Voisin. To the nobles, she was an oracle. To the church, she was a heretic. To the poor, she was simply a midwife. But to those who came to her beneath the cover of night, she was far more powerful, an artisan of fate, a sculpture of death. Imagine her home, a cramped, dimly lit dwelling at the edge of the city, walls lined with jars of powders, roots, bones, dried herbs, and unmarked potions sealed with dark wax. The moment the door closed, the outside world dissolved. The noblewomen who visited her could no longer hear the music of Versailles or the soft hum of court gossip. Instead, they heard the bubbling of cauldrons, the scrape of a pestle grinding something unholy, the faint whisper of silk as they adjusted their cloaks to hide trembling hands. La Voisin greeted her with a smile that knew too much. Her eyes, sharp, bright, almost feline,
studied them the way one might study a candle's flame, searching for the moment it would flicker. She never needed them to confess aloud. Their desperation hung around them like perfume. And desperation always leads to the same quiet request. A husband who no longer inspires affection. A rival whose laughter has become unbearable. A lover who must return. A future that needs adjusting. La Voisin did not deal in crude violence. She sold precision, elegance, a poison that slipped silently into the bloodstream, stealing life with the softness of a sigh. Arsenic so pure that it dissolved into wine without changing its color. Powders fine enough to disappear into a spoon of broth. Pastes that left no scent, no trace, no suspicion. Her clients left with tiny glass phials tucked into embroidered sleeves, their hearts pounding with equal parts fear and relief. Because in this hidden marketplace of death, no one judged them, no one moralized. All that mattered was coin and courage. But poison was only part of her craft. Those who sought more than death, who desired not the end, but the rearrangement of fate itself, whispered another request, one that could not be purchased in daylight. They asked for magic, and magic, dark, forbidden, ancient, was something La Voisin offered without hesitation. At night, in rooms lit only by trembling candles, she performed ceremonies whispered through generations of alchemists, healers, and heretics. The nobles came cloaked like thieves, though their voices carried the tremor of people used to commanding armies and courts. For them, she created charms soaked in moonlight, talismans carved from bone, powders said to change destiny. And for the most desperate among them, she whispered prayers not to God, but to whatever answered from the shadows. Powder for succession, powder for love, powder for disappearance. Each request bought with gold and secrecy. As the fire beside you crackles once more, listen closely. You can almost hear the murmurs of those women, their silk gowns rustling as they bent over La Voisin's table, seeking solutions no church, no law, no king could give them. Versailles glittered with perfection. But Paris held the truth, and the truth was far darker than any candle-lit hall could ever reveal.
Night comes softly over France, settling like a velvet curtain across rooftops and church towers. And as the fire beside you flickers, we step deeper into the shadows of this tale, into the realm where alchemy gives way to ritual, and desperation transforms into devotion of a darker kind. For some clients of La Voisin, poison alone was not enough.
Death could remove an obstacle, yes, but it could not command affection. It could not bend a king's gaze. It could not restore the kind of love that slipped away like perfume in the morning air. And so those who desired something more sought something forbidden. Among them, according to whispers that still drift through the centuries, was the most powerful woman in France after the Queen herself, Madame de Montespan, beloved consort of Louis XIV, the woman whose laughter echoed in the king's private gardens, whose perfume lingered in his chambers, whose ambition was as sharp as the diamonds she wore. But power is a fragile crown, and youth is a flame that dims too quickly. When younger, prettier faces began to appear in the court, Montespan panicked, not outwardly, not in public where every gesture was examined, but in the trembling of her breath, in the tightening of her smile, in the way she clutched her rosary at night, despite fearing it no longer loved her back. And in that trembling, she sought La Voisin. Imagine the scene, a noble carriage arriving at a forgotten street at midnight, its wheels sinking into the mud, its lantern swaying like a dying star. A woman cloaked in velvet steps down, her embroidered shoes barely touching the ground as she follows a hooded attendant into a narrow doorway. She smells not of roses tonight, but of fear. Inside, candles burn low, their flames bent as if listening. La Voisin greets her with a bow that is neither servile nor deferential, as if recognizing a fellow practitioner of power disguised in silk. But what Montespan wants cannot be brewed in a vial or hidden in a goblet. She wants dominance, permanence. She wants the king's heart sealed to hers with something stronger than vows. And so begins the ritual whispered in every gossip-laden salon of Versailles, the Black Mass. Not the hysteria of superstition, but the quiet choreography of a ceremony designed to unmake the boundaries between desire and damnation. Picture a clandestine cellar, its walls sweating with damp, lit only by trembling candles set in human fat wax, a detail whispered by terrified witnesses decades later. A defrocked priest mutters Latin not meant for heaven. Dark incense curls in the air like thoughts one should never admit aloud. And at the center, atop an altar cold as marble in winter, lies the body of the woman who once commanded France with a single glance, now offering herself to shadows gripping at her soul. Montespan whispers her pleas for loyalty, for love, for the king's passion to remain chained to her name. Around her, La Voisin mixes blood with crushed herbs, pours oils over talismans shaped from bone, stirs concoctions meant to bind two destinies together by force rather than fate. The ritual rises to a crescendo, but the night does not scream, it listens. And in that listening, the boundaries grow thin. When it ends, the candles gutter, the cellar grows colder. Montespan stands, trembling, but certain she has done what was necessary to remain the Sun King's chosen star. By morning, she returns to Versailles, her expression composed, her steps steady. Yet the shadows seem to follow her across the polished floors, like silent companions who know too much. and beneath the brilliance of the Hall of Mirrors, no one suspects that the glow around her has darkened just slightly, like gold dipped in soot.
Let your breath slow as we leave the candlelit palaces of France behind, drifting instead across a vast ocean toward a land where winter arrives with a severity that bites into bone. New England, late 19th century. A world of wooden houses sealed against the cold, chimneys breathing thin smoke into a sky the color of iron. Outside, snow covers the earth like a white shroud, muffling footsteps and swallowing sound. Inside, though, something darker than winter is spreading. Consumption, what we now call tuberculosis, moves through families like a silent predator, stealing breath, hollowing bodies, turning strong men and bright-eyed girls into pale silhouettes, fading day by day. To the people of that time, it felt less like illness and more like something stalking them. Imagine a home lit only by kerosene lamps. Someone coughs in the bedroom, one of those deep, tearing coughs that ends with flecks of bright red staining a handkerchief. A heartbeat echoes softly in the room, slow, tired, uneven. Skin turns the color of snow outside. Lips redden with the faint trace of blood, and eyes deepen into dark, shimmering hollows. At night, the sick seem to glow faintly, as if life is burning out from within. And when one member of a family dies, more soon follow. Not months later, sometimes weeks, sometimes days. The terror of it grows quietly, like frost spreading across a window pane. People begin to whisper, not about disease. They do not understand disease. They whisper about the dead. How strange it is that after burial, a dead relative's shadow seems to fall across the living. How peculiar that the surviving family grows weaker, even though the source of their grief lies in the frozen earth. And slowly, a belief begins to take form, as natural as fear itself. The dead are not resting. Something beneath the ground is feeding. Something that once breathed among them is now draining the strength of those left behind. The word vampire is never spoken lightly, but in the snow-covered towns of Rhode Island and Connecticut, it begins slipping into conversation like a forbidden secret. Not the European creature of capes and castles, but a grim American version born from grief, desperation, and bitter winter nights. In these communities, every creak becomes a warning. Every draft of cold air feels like a breath from beneath the soil. Mothers stay awake, clutching their children, certain they feel a presence in the room. Fathers sit by the fire, sharpening shovels, convinced the answer lies somewhere in the cemetery just beyond the dark line of trees. Wind howls through cracks in the walls, sounding eerily like a voice trying to speak. Snow crunches heavily under unseen steps. Fear settles over the towns like another layer of frost, one that refuses to melt. And this fear crystallizes into action. A single family's tragedy would soon ignite the most infamous vampire panic in American history. The Brown family of Exeter,
Simple farmers, ordinary people, would become the unwilling center of a storm of superstition. As we step closer to their story, let your mind soften, your breath slow, and imagine the cold pressing in around you. Imagine a father watching his family vanish one by one. Imagine the impossible choice he must face when the living begin to fear the dead who may not be dead at all. The wind outside grows louder, carrying a warning across the snow. Our path now leads into a frozen graveyard, where truth and terror would meet beneath a layer of ice. And it all begins with a single shovel hitting frozen earth.
The wind grows sharper as we step deeper into the story, settling over the small town of Exeter like a blade of ice pressed gently against the throat of every grieving family. And at the center of this frozen sorrow stands George Brown, a quiet farmer, a man used to the rhythm of fields and seasons, not the cruel arithmetic of death. His home, once filled with the warmth of voices, has become a place of empty chairs and fading echoes. Consumption claimed his wife first. Mary, gentle, soft-spoken, faded like a candle burning too fast. Then Mary Olive, their eldest daughter, followed, her vibrant youth swallowed by the same invisible hunger. And now Edwin, his only son, lies in bed with the stillness of someone who might drift away while the house sleeps. He coughs blood into a cloth already stained with too many memories. His heartbeat is a fragile metronome, tapping out the last beats of a dwindling life. To George, this is tragedy, but to the townsfolk, it is a pattern, one that looks too much like something supernatural. They murmured to him at the general store, on church steps, near the frozen well. Someone is feeding on them, they say in hushed tones. Someone from your own family. And though George shakes his head, brushes the words away like snow from his coat, they cling to him in the cold. A father can endure grief, but helplessness is the weight that breaks a man. Imagine him sitting at Edwin's bedside late at night, the candle flickering, the boys breathing shallow and uneven. Outside, the wind scrapes against the walls like fingers seeking a way in. George watches his son's chest rise and fall with painful effort, and he remembers his neighbor's words, not because he believes them, but because he has nothing left to try. On the morning of March 17th, 1892, the decision is made. The snow crunches beneath boots as George walks to the cemetery with a group of men carrying shovels and lanterns. The ground is frozen solid, resisting them with every strike of iron against ice-packed earth. But desperation is stronger than winter. The first grave opened is Mary's. The coffin reveals little more than bones, fragile and long stripped of life. The men nod solemnly, a normal rest. The second grave is Mary Olive's. Again, only the remnants time leaves behind. Relief flickers in George's heart. Perhaps this was a mistake. Perhaps fear has led them astray. But then they reach the third grave, the grave of Mercy Lena Brown,
the daughter whose name still felt warm on George's tongue. She died only 8 weeks prior, in the dead of winter. When the coffin lid creaks open, the air itself seems to stop. Mercy lies within, her features eerily intact. Her skin still has a faint blush, her hair longer than before, her nails appearing to have grown. And when they cut into her chest, liquid blood pools dark and red as though her heart has never stopped beating. A murmur sweeps through the group, fear, vindication, dread, all swirling together like snow in a sudden gust. "She's feeding on them," someone whispers. "She's taking Edwin's life." George stands frozen, staring at the body of his daughter, now turned into something the town believes is monstrous. But he sees only Mercy, his child, lost to winter and illness. For a moment he wavers, but the eyes of the town press against him. Fear is a fire that demands offerings. The ritual must continue. The choice is made. And the snow-covered cemetery falls into a silence deeper than death.
The lanterns flicker in the cemetery wind as the final grave stands open, the cold settling into the bones of every man gathered there. What happens next would echo across history, twisting grief into legend and terror into ritual. Mercy Lena Brown, preserved by winter's cruel stillness, lies unchanged in her coffin, an image so at odds with the frozen earth around her that even the most rational among them feel their breath catch. The doctor steps forward, his hands steady, but his eyes unsure. When the blade parts the skin of her chest, a dark pool of liquid blood rises like a final accusation. The men recoil. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone else whispers, "She's feeding on him. She's still feeding on Edwin." The wind howls across the open graves like a warning. In that moment, George Brown, standing over the body of his daughter, feels something inside him fracture. This is not the girl he carried in his arms, not the child who once braided flowers into her hair in the summer fields, but this is what the town believes she has become: a curse, a mouth in the dark, a thief of life. And when a community decides something is monstrous, no logic, no science, no father's love can stop what follows. The ritual begins with a silence so deep it seems to swallow the falling snow. The men lift Mercy's heart and liver, placing them on a flat stone stained with winter frost. The fire they build crackles weakly at first, then flares as if startled by what it has been asked to consume. As the organs burn, the smell rises, sharp, bitter, metallic, mingling with the damp scent of earth. Sparks fly upward like lost souls searching for warmth. George watches, his face hollow, as the last physical pieces of his daughter blacken and crumble. And yet the ritual is only half complete. In their desperate logic, Mercy's ashes are not an ending, but a cure. When the flames die down, the men scrape the charred remains into a tin cup, mix them with water from the nearby farmhouse well, and bring the dark, cloudy liquid to Edmund's bedside. The room smells of cold stone and fading life as George holds the cup to his son's trembling lips. Edwin drinks not because he understands, not because he believes, but because he trusts his father. And trust can be the gentlest form of tragedy. The taste must have been terrible, but worse than the taste is the hope pressed into that single act, that something so grotesque
so heartbreaking could somehow pull him back from the edge. 2 months later, Edwin dies. Not from vampires, not from curses, but from the same disease that claimed the rest of his family. The ritual, the grave digging, the ashes, they changed nothing. And yet, in failing, they left a mark on history deeper than any cure. Mercy Brown becomes a name whispered far beyond New England. Her story crosses oceans. Bram Stoker himself collects newspaper clippings about her before writing Dracula, turning a frightened girl from Rhode Island into the silent heartbeat of a myth. But here, in the snow-covered quiet of Exeter, Mercy is not a monster. She is a daughter. Edwin is not a victim of the undead. He is a boy lost to illness and fear. And George Brown is not a man who battled vampires. He is a father enduring the undurable, trying to save his child in the only way he was told might work. If you listen closely now, beneath the wind, you can almost hear their breaths, the ones taken in grief, the ones lost in winter, the ones transformed into legends because the truth was too painful to face. Tonight, as your heart beats steadily in your chest, remember, in those days, that very sound could condemn you. And yet now, it is only a reminder that you are alive, safe, and far from the shadows that haunted them. Let your breath soften as the world around you dims, and imagine yourself stepping into a quiet government archive long after midnight. The fluorescent lights hum faintly overhead, casting pale reflections across rows of gray filing cabinets. The air is cold, sterile, holding the weight of secrets that were never meant to see the light. You reach a drawer marked with a classification code instead of a name. When it slides open, a stack of documents stares back, pages blacked out with thick strokes of ink, like wounds stitched shut. These are not myths, not rumors. These are the remnants of a project that once lived only in whispers. MKUltra. Tonight, you are not in a medieval castle, nor a snowy graveyard. You stand at the edge of a different kind of darkness, one built by men in suits, by fluorescent bulbs instead of torches, by science instead of superstition. But the fear it created was no less ancient. Picture America in the early 1950s, gripped by Cold War paranoia. The government believed minds could be stolen, that thoughts could be rewritten, that somewhere behind the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union had discovered a way to turn human beings into puppets of ideology. In that climate of dread, the CIA began searching for the ultimate tool of control. Not weapons, not bombs, but consciousness itself. And so MKUltra was born in a small office buried inside the Technical Services Division, its existence known only to a handful of high-ranking officials. The idea sounds like fiction. Experiments using LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, electromagnetic pulses, psychological manipulation. But the most chilling part is not the methods. It is the victims. They were not enemy agents, not captured spies. They were ordinary citizens, people checking into hospitals for insomnia, college students volunteering for research, military personnel attending routine evaluations. In some cases, people who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Imagine a young man in a university cafeteria accepting a small cup of liquid handed to him by a researcher with a reassuring smile. He thinks it's part of a memory study. He does not know it contains LSD. Within 30 minutes, the edges of reality begin to ripple. The room stretches like warm wax. Voices melt together in echoes. His heartbeat becomes a drum pounding behind his eyes. He tries to stand, but the floor bends beneath him like water. And all the while, behind a two-way mirror, doctors in white coats take notes. They whisper about behavioral pliability and mind fragmentation, as if his terror is simply data to be filed. Now, imagine a patient in a psychiatric hospital, already vulnerable, already searching for clarity. She is told she is receiving new therapy. Instead, she is placed in a room with no light, no sound, no sense of time. Days pass, or perhaps hours, or perhaps weeks. She no longer knows. Her thoughts become thin, fragile like moths fluttering against a glass jar. In those sterile rooms, MKUltra researchers believed they could erase a mind and rebuild it from scratch, a human soul reduced to an experiment. And yet everything was meticulously documented, because every experiment was classified, every action authorized, every violation buried under layers of bureaucracy thick enough to suffocate the truth. For decades, anyone who spoke about mind control, government chemical experiments, or secret psychological manipulation was dismissed as paranoid, delusional, or unhinged. But the truth was there all along, sealed in drawers like the one you opened, waiting, breathing, humming with fluorescent silence. Tonight, as we begin this chapter, remember, not all conspiracies are born in shadow. Some are born under office lights, in rooms that smell of ink and disinfectant, carried out by people who believed they were protecting the nation, even as they broke the minds of its citizens.
Let the room around you fade as we move deeper into the architecture of secrecy, down corridors where the hum of fluorescent lights becomes the heartbeat of 1,000 hidden experiments. MKUltra did not live in one building or one laboratory. It lived everywhere, woven through universities, hospitals, military bases, even unsuspecting suburban offices. Each location a doorway into the same silent question. How far would a government go to control the human mind? Imagine an ordinary clinic, the kind with magazines in the waiting room and pastel walls meant to soothe. A man arrives for what he believes is a routine anxiety treatment. He signs a form that he barely reads, reassured by a doctor with silver-rimmed glasses. He does not know that this clinic is one of dozens being quietly funded through shell organizations, its doctors instructed to administer high doses of LSD without patient consent. He swallows a pill. Within an hour, his sense of self begins to dissolve. The doctor watches calmly, pen tapping a clipboard as panic floods the man's veins. Subject demonstrates destabilization at predicted intervals, the doctor murmurs. The man hears none of this. He is floating, falling, spinning, his thoughts unraveling into strings of color. Then there is silence, heavy and absolute, a silence that feels engineered. Now imagine a woman enrolled in a sleep study at a university. She enters a small room with a single bed and a microphone hanging from the ceiling like a watchful eye. The researcher smiles warmly but speaks too softly, as if practicing detachment. The moment she lies down, electrodes cling to her skin like cold fingertips. They inject a substance she cannot name. She drifts, not into dreams, but into hallucinations vivid enough to blur the border between imagination and torture. She sees doors opening into corridors that don't exist, faces she has never met leaning close, whispering impossible things. Colors pulse behind her eyelids like warnings. When she wakes, she has no memory, only a lingering sense of dread she cannot explain. She will never know she was part of MKUltra Sub-Project 68, where psychic driving was used to break subjects into mental blankness before attempting to rebuild personality from scratch. These were not isolated cases. In one army barracks, soldiers believed they were testing gas masks, but were instead sprayed with aerosolized LSD. Men who trusted their commanding officers suddenly found themselves laughing uncontrollably, crying at shadows, screaming as their rifles melted in their hands, a hallucination engineered for study. Behind mirrored glass, military psychologists took notes with the dispassionate precision of clockmakers. In another building, this one tucked behind an unmarked door in a university basement, a group of students was offered money to participate in what was described as a creativity experiment. They were given LSD and then interrogated under blinding lights until they sobbed from confusion. The researchers measured their responses with rulers and heart monitor clips, reducing raw human terror into numerical data points. And yet, in another corner of the country, a safe house known only as the Pad became the site of Operation Midnight Climax, where unsuspecting civilians were lured into rooms with one-way mirrors. They were drugged, observed, manipulated, while agents drank cocktails behind the glass and took meticulous notes on behavioral vulnerability. Some subjects left believing they had simply had too much to drink. Others woke with memories broken into pieces like shattered glass. No one ever learned they were experiments. The most haunting truth is this: MKUltra was not created by villains in dark robes. It was created by ordinary men who convinced themselves that violating consciousness was justified in the name of national security. And because their actions were hidden beneath layers of classification, their moral lines dissolved as easily as the minds they experimented on. In this dim archive of forgotten names and redacted pages, one question lingers like a breath.
If control of the mind becomes possible, who decides how far is too far?
There is a moment, deep inside every conspiracy, when rumor becomes evidence, when whispers gain enough gravity to bend the truth into view. For MKUltra, that moment arrived in the summer of 1975. Picture a dim government office at dawn, blinds half closed, dust drifting like tiny ghosts in the beam of a projector. A committee has gathered. Senators shuffle through stacks of documents, their covers stamped with a red classification label that once meant no eyes but authorized. Now, for the first time, those pages are being read aloud in a room full of people who were never meant to hear them. The lights dim further as a reel-to-reel tape recorder clicks to life. A trembling voice, one of the test subjects, describes seeing his hands melt into liquid silver while CIA doctors watched without a trace of emotion. A senator leans back in his chair, stunned. Another removes his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as if trying to steady a world that has suddenly tilted. And in that silence, the truth finally steps into the light. The rumors had always been real. Outside that room, the public waits like an audience in the final act of a tragedy. Newspapers prepare headlines, reporters sharpen questions. Families who lost loved ones to unexplained breakdowns sit beside telephones hoping for an explanation that can stitch together years of confusion. But the answers that come are shards, not whole stories. MKUltra records were mostly destroyed in 1973, ordered into incinerators by men who feared exactly this moment. Only a few boxes, misfiled, overlooked, survived the purge. They sit on a long wooden table now, smelling faintly of soot and age. Investigators open them with the caution of people handling cursed relics. Inside are receipts for drugs, handwritten notes describing hallucinations as useful distortions, and budget requests disguised as academic research. Not the full truth, just enough to reveal the magnitude of what had been done. And yet, even with shredded archives and vanished witnesses, a pattern becomes undeniable. Ordinary people had been used like pages in a notebook, written on, erased, written again, without consent, without mercy. In another world, these details might have sparked riots. But here, in the tired calm of a nation already stretched thin by war and scandal, the revelations settle like cold ash. People shake their heads, whisper that this cannot be real, then read the reports again, unable to look away. The most haunting testimonies do not come from scientists or officials. They come from those who felt reality fracture in their hands. A young student who spent decades believing his panic attacks were his own fault, only to learn he had been given LSD as part of a covert trial. A soldier discharged for psychological instability, who later discovered he had been exposed to aerosolized hallucinogens during field exercises. A woman whose dreams unspooled into nightmares after a sleep study she barely remembered signing up for. Their stories overlap like layers of an old palimpsest, scratched out, rewritten, but never fully erased. And now,
As you listen in the stillness of your own room, perhaps you can sense it too. The quiet terror of knowing that some conspiracies survive, not because they are hidden well, but because the truth sounds too unbelievable to accept. For MKUltra, exposure did not bring resolution. It brought questions, uncomfortable, unfinished questions about the human mind, about power, and about the fragile boundary between protection and violation. And as the committee room empties, as the projectors cool, and the documents are locked away once more, one final thought lingers like a shadow against the wall. If the mind is the last sanctuary we possess, what happens when that sanctuary can be breached? Tonight, as the wind brushes your window and the world grows quiet, let that question drift with you into the darkness. Some doors close, others are left slightly open. MKUltra remains one of those doors, never fully shut, never fully understood.
Imagine a night so still that even the wind seems afraid to breathe. A night where torches flicker against stone walls, their flames swaying like whispers before a storm. It is the early morning of October 13th, 1307, long before the superstitions, long before the number 13 became cursed, and yet it is here, in this cold medieval dawn, that the roots of fear began to grow. France is silent, too silent. The kind of silence that feels arranged, intentional, as if someone powerful had gently placed their finger on the lips of an entire kingdom. Behind the tall walls of Paris, King Philip IV cannot sleep. The king known as Philip the Fair, a name that spoke of his pale beauty, not of any fairness of heart, stands over a table covered in parchment. Each parchment contains a list of names, and every name belongs to a knight of the most feared and respected order in Europe, the Knights Templar. For 2 centuries, the Templars had been the armored shadow of Christendom, warriors who guarded pilgrims, protected treasure, and held secrets no ordinary man could imagine. They had banks more powerful than monarchs, ships that crossed seas without permission, and loyalties that bowed only to the Pope. And that was exactly the problem. Philip was drowning in debt after failed wars. France had no money left, and the Templars, wealthy, disciplined, untouchable, were a reminder of everything he could not control. Power envies power, and desperate kings do desperate things. Somewhere in the hall, a candle snaps loudly. Philip flinches, as if caught in his own thoughts. He knows what he is about to do, and he knows the world will never forget it. The king signs a sealed order, cold, absolute, written in a hand that does not hesitate. Copies of this order are delivered through the night to every sheriff, every captain, every appointed man loyal enough to obey without question. Inside the sealed message is a single command: arrest every Templar, all at once, at dawn. A silence follows after the ink dries,
a silence that settles over France in the same way fog covers a graveyard. Meanwhile, the Templars sleep peacefully in their commanderies. Their swords rest beside their beds. Their white mantles, marked with the red cross of sacrifice, hang dry and still. They have no idea what is coming. They had fought for kings. They had died for kings. And none of that mattered anymore. Somewhere far outside Paris, a rooster crows. One single crow marking the time when night begins to loosen its grip on the world. Then comes another sound, soft but unmistakable. Boots. Dozens of boots, hundreds, moving through streets normally empty at this hour, moving with purpose, moving with secrecy. One Templar commander wakes up to the noise and steps outside, adjusting his cloak. He sees torches approaching, a lot of torches. His first instinct is confusion. His second instinct is dread. Something is wrong, very wrong. Before he can speak, before he could even call out to the brothers still sleeping inside, the soldiers raise their orders bearing the royal seal. He doesn't need to read them. He already understands. Betrayal has a taste. Cold, metallic, like blood on snow. And on that Friday, October 13th, the blood of the Templars would stain the dawn.
Dawn breaks slowly, bleeding pale gold across the stone walls of Paris. But for the Knights Templar, it is not a sunrise. It is a sentence being carried out in real time. In commanderies across France, doors are kicked open. Soldiers pour inside with a force that feels less like an arrest and more like a hunt. Startled knights leap from their bunks, reaching instinctively for swords that they never get the chance to touch. Shackles clamp around wrists. The cold bite of iron replaces the warmth of sleep. By mid-morning, wagons filled with captured Templars are rattling toward Paris. Some whisper prayers, some sit in stunned silence, but most simply stare ahead with the hollow expression of men who cannot understand how their king, whom they had served loyally, has turned them into enemies overnight. In Paris, the prisons overflow, damp, narrow, smelling of mold and unwashed stone. The cells choke with the weight of fear. And the king's inquisitors, men with faces as smooth and expressionless as carved wood, begin their work. Interrogations start quietly. A few questions, a few accusations, but Philip needs confessions, not truth, and confessions in this age are extracted with fire and rope. In the dim torchlight, one Templar, bruised and bloodied, whispers, "We served God." An inquisitor leans in and answers softly, "Serve him now by confessing." And then the torture begins. Stripped of their dignity and bound to wooden frames, knights who once rode fearlessly into battle now face a different kind of enemy, one they cannot strike, cannot parry, cannot resist with steel. Their bodies twist under unbearable pain. Their voices echo down the stone corridors, breaking, shattering, pleading. But the king's scribes sit quietly beside the tormentors,
quills ready, waiting to write down the word that Philip needs most: heresy. As days pass, rumors begin to seep out into the streets of Paris. Citizens gather in taverns, murmuring in disbelief. The Templars worshipped idols, someone claims. They spat on the cross, another whispers. They made pacts with the devil. Lies spread easily in fearful times, and these lies, spoken often enough, start sounding like truth. In the deepest part of the dungeon, the Grand Master himself, Jacques de Molay, sits chained to a wall. His beard is long, his face is gaunt, yet his eyes burn with an intensity that refuses to dim. When the inquisitors accuse him of forsaking Christ, he lifts his head and speaks with a calm that unsettles even his captors. "We served the Holy Land. We bled for it. If you speak of betrayal, look beyond these chains." But Philip does not want a defense. He wants surrender, a broken Templar order, a reason to seize their fortune. And no voice, not even that of the Grand Master, can stop the tide already rolling over them. Outside, winter wind lashes against the prison walls, scattering ashes left from torches burned too low. Far away in Rome, the Pope hesitates, caught between protecting an ancient order and protecting his alliance with a powerful French king. Meanwhile, more confessions, forced, fabricated, soaked in agony, flow from the prisons like poisoned water. And Philip smiles, because the destruction he planned is unfolding perfectly. The Templars will not leave these walls as warriors. They will leave as condemned men. The world is already beginning to forget their honor and remember only the accusations. And that, more than any blade, is how kings kill legends.
Spring arrives in Paris like a stranger, quiet, pale, and unwelcome. The city tries to warm, but the stone walls remain cold, as if they remember everything that has been done within them. And on a gray March morning in 1314, the Knights Templar are led out of their cells for the final time. SFX, slow footsteps on stone, chains dragging softly. Among them walks Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master. His back is bent, his beard tangled, his wrists bruised from chains, yet something about him remains unbroken. Even the guards see it, that faint, steady flame behind his eyes, a flame no dungeon could extinguish. The prisoners are marched toward the Ile de la Cité, where a wooden platform has been built beside the Seine. Crowds gather along the riverbank, drawn by fear, curiosity, or perhaps the dark comfort of seeing powerful men brought low. Torches flicker in the morning wind. The smell of pitch mixes with river mist. SFX, river water sloshing, murmurs of distant crowd. A royal herald climbs the platform and unrolls a parchment. His voice rings sharp and official. Accusations of heresy, blasphemy, corruption, words rehearsed for years, words crafted for convenience, not truth. De Molay listens without blinking. When the herald finishes, the Grand Master asks for permission to speak. The crowd falls into a hush, even the guards hesitate. And then, in a voice roughened by months of suffering but still steady, he declares, "We are innocent. Every confession drawn from us was forced through pain, and I affirm, before God and man, the order of the temple is pure." A whisper ripples through the crowd. Shock, fear, admiration, disbelief. This is not how condemned men speak. This is how legends speak. The herald, shaken, turns to the king's officials, but Philip's will is absolute. The sentence stands. De Molay and the surviving leaders are tied to stakes. Kindling is piled high around their feet. The executioner hesitates only a moment before lowering his torch. SFX, fire catching, soft at first, then rising with a dry crackle. Flames climb slowly, licking at wood, at cloth, at skin. Smoke coils upward like a dark prayer. But De Molay does not scream. Instead, as the fire surrounds him, he lifts his head toward the cathedral spires and speaks words that will haunt Europe for centuries. Pope Clement, King Philip, before this year is out, I summon you to stand before God with me, to answer for what you have done. The crowd gasps. Some fall to their knees, others flee, covering their faces. Only the king's officers remain unmoved, though a flicker of unease passes between them. As the flames consume the Grand Master, the Seine carries the smoke away, drifting through the city like a warning. And then, something strange happens. Silence. No birds, no murmurs, no wind. Just silence, as if Paris itself is listening. Weeks pass, then months. Summer barely begins when news travels through Europe like a whispered curse. Pope Clement V is dead, struck down by illness, sudden and brutal. People say his body refused to rest, the flames of the cremation pit leaping unnaturally high, as if trying to reclaim its victim. And then, before the year ends, King Philip IV falls from his horse during a hunt. His body fails within days. France trembles. Whispers rise. Some say De Molay's curse killed them. Others say it was justice. Others say it was God. But history remembers only this. On the day the Grand Master burned, he predicted the death of both the Pope and the King within a year. And he was right. From that moment on, Friday the 13th became a wound in European memory, a day of betrayal, a day of fire, a day when power revealed its darkest face. Picture a room lit only by a single fluorescent tube, humming softly like a nervous thought. It is March 1962. The Cold War is not a war of bullets, but of whispers, suspicions, and hands hovering over red buttons. In Washington, D.C., inside the thick concrete walls of the Pentagon, men in crisp uniforms sit around a long wooden table. Their medals gleam under the pale light, but their expressions reveal something colder than steel. Cuba had become a wound in America's pride. Only months earlier, the Bay of Pigs invasion had failed disastrously. And now Fidel Castro, young, defiant, unmovable, stood aligned with the Soviet Union just 90 miles from American shores. The generals felt cornered, and cornered men often reach for desperate, unthinkable ideas. On the table lies a document stamped "Top Secret," so secret that even many within the government will never know it existed. Its title, Operation Northwoods, a plan so surreal, so morally twisted, that it sounds like something designed in the fevered imagination of a conspiracy theorist. But it wasn't. It was drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military authority in the United States.
One general adjusts his glasses, clears his throat, and begins to read the proposal aloud. The room remains still except for the rustle of paper, and as he reads, the silence grows heavier, coiling through the air like smoke. Northwoods suggests staging violent events, real ones against American citizens. A hijacked airliner, a bomb on a civilian street, a manufactured tragedy that would shock the public, ignite fury, and justify a full-scale war against Cuba. The generals do not smile, they do not tremble. They speak with the calm of men discussing weather forecasts rather than human lives. One suggests painting a U.S. jet to look like a Cuban plane. Another recommends planting explosives inside a Navy ship and blowing it up near Havana. A third proposes creating fake funerals for fake victims to create real anger. The logic is cold. If the people will not support a war, give them a reason to. And for a moment in that windowless room, the line between reality and horror blurs until they become indistinguishable. Then the doors open. President John F. Kennedy enters, not with the swagger of youthful charm, but with the tension of a man balancing the weight of two superpowers on his shoulders. Someone hands him the proposal. He reads silently, eyes scanning line after line. His face does not change, but something within him shifts, like a shadow moving behind his pupils. When he finishes, he closes the folder gently, as if afraid to contaminate the air with the ideas inside. No, he says, one word, quiet, steady, absolute. A refusal that slices through the room sharper than any blade. A refusal that saves thousands, perhaps millions, from becoming pawns in a fabricated tragedy. Kennedy leaves without another word. The generals look at one another, their plan evaporating like steam from a dying fire. Outside, the rain begins to fall against the Pentagon windows, tapping softly like restless fingers. Inside the abandoned conference room, the draft of Operation Northwoods remains on the table, a ghost in ink, a reminder of how close a nation came to turning its own citizens into casualties of its ambition. And tonight, as we drift deeper into the quiet of history, that ghost follows us, not to frighten, but to remind that not every conspiracy is born from madness. Some are born from rooms where powerful men make plans in silence and hope no one ever learns the truth.
After Kennedy walks out, the room does not return to normal. Something hangs in the air, thick, unsettled, like the residue of a storm that almost formed but never broke. Operation Northwoods is not shredded, not burned, not erased. It is simply set aside. A quiet ghost sleeping in a drawer. A ghost waiting for someone brave enough or reckless enough to open it again. Outside the Pentagon, the world continues unaware. People buy groceries, walk dogs, fix broken fences, and laugh under umbrellas as the rain thickens. No one knows how close their country came to sacrificing them for a geopolitical chess move. And yet, secrecy has a weight. For the men who crafted Northwoods, that weight slowly begins to pull at their conscience, though none of them ever voice it. Duty can silence guilt. Rank
can drown morality. But silence grows cracks. Years pass. The Cold War grinds on. Kennedy is assassinated. Cuba remains defiant. And Northwoods, never used, never forgotten, stays buried under layers of classified tags. Like a fossil no one wants to admit came from a living creature. Then comes the 1970s, a decade of distrust, a decade when the American public begins to ask questions the government has avoided for years. Questions about Vietnam, questions about Watergate, questions about surveillance, experiments, and shadows moving behind the curtain of democracy. And then, almost by accident, the ghost slips out. A congressional investigation known as the Church Committee begins digging into abuses of intelligence agencies. They expect secrets, they expect questionable operations, but no one expects to find a blueprint for state-sponsored terror inside U.S. borders. One staffer opens a file, expecting bureaucratic boredom, and instead finds Northwoods. A plan to deceive an entire nation by turning its citizens into unwitting participants in a staged tragedy. A plan signed by the highest military authorities. A plan that almost happened. The room goes silent. The same kind of silence that filled the Pentagon conference room 12 years earlier. Reporters gather in crowded hallways, hungry for truth. Senators sit speechless, hands folded tightly as if anchoring themselves to something stable. And for the first time since 1962, Northwoods steps into the light. The revelation hits the public like a cold wind. Some refuse to believe it. It's too insane, they say. Others read the documents and feel a shiver crawl up their spine. Because here finally was proof that conspiracy theories are sometimes just undiscovered history. Yet the strangest part is this: no one is punished. No general is tried, no official is disgraced. Northwoods becomes a scandal without villains, because its creators had already retired or faded into anonymity. All that remains is the blueprint, the possibility, the warning. And on quiet nights, historians still wonder, if Kennedy had not said no, what kind of world would we be living in today? A world built on fear, on manipulation, on tragedies designed by those sworn to protect? The rain outside softens, tapering to a gentle patter against the dark glass. The storm has passed, but the memory of it lingers, like the echo of a distant siren drifting through the fog. And so, Northwoods settles back into the archives, its pages yellowing slowly, its edges curling like the fingers of a sleeping hand. But it is not gone. Ideas like these never vanish completely. They wait, they linger, they haunt. And they remind us that the line between security and deception is often drawn in pencil. Night settles slowly, like a blanket drawn over the last flicker of thought. The rain outside has thinned into a gentle mist, tapping softly against the windows as if knocking on the edge of memory. And our journey through secrets, shadows, and unsolved corners of history begins to quiet as well. Operation Northwoods fades back into its drawer, its pages cooling like steel left out in the night. But its echo remains, a quiet reminder that truth and conspiracy often sit closer together than we would like to believe. And yet, the purpose of nights like this is not to trouble your sleep. It is to walk with you through the corridors of forgotten stories,
so that when you finally close your eyes, you do so with a mind soothed by understanding, not shaken by fear. Imagine now that the world around you dims. The Cold War rooms vanish. The Pentagon's concrete walls dissolve. The flickering torches of medieval Europe fade into gentle, drifting sparks. The cemetery snow from New England melts into silence, and all that remains is you, here in a quiet space where history feels like a distant hum rather than a weight pressing on your chest. The stories we explored tonight, Acoustic Kitty, The Poisoners of Versailles, The Vampire Panic, MKUltra, The Fall of the Templars, and The Strange Shadows of Northwoods, are bound together by one truth. Humans fear what they cannot see, and when fear grows, so do theories, rumors, explanations that try to fill the darkness. Some are fantasies, some are warnings, and some, as we learned, are real. But you don't need to hold onto any of that now. Let it drift. Let it unravel like old parchment curling at the corners. You've looked at the shadows long enough for one night. Now you can let them go. Think of history as a river, steady, ancient, patient. It carries horror and beauty in equal measure, but tonight it carries you gently. It whispers to you that you are safe, that the world outside your window is quieter than the worlds we visited, that nothing from the past will follow you into your dreams unless you invite it. And as your breath slows, feel the room darken just a little more. Feel the weight leave your shoulders, melting like snow touched by dawn. Feel the soft pull of rest waiting to guide you into a place where stories no longer sting, they only float. So let this be your final moment of wakefulness, a calm exhale, a soft blink, a gentle surrender. The secrets we uncovered tonight will stay in the archives. The fears we traced will stay locked where they belong. And you can drift into sleep knowing that knowledge, even the unsettling kind, becomes peaceful when held at arm's length. Thank you for wandering through these forgotten chapters with me. Thank you for trusting me with your time, your curiosity, your quiet. Now, close your eyes, sink into the hush. Let the darkness become velvet, soft and warm, and may your dreams tonight be filled not with conspiracies, but with colors, memories, and the comfort of a world finally at rest. Sleep well, my friend. The past is quiet now.